Cook kits. Talking about cook kits. My ultralight cook kit setup, and my usual variation is under 6 ounces. That is including, of course, any consumables. So let's go right into what is inside my general cook kit. Right now, how I have it set up, and hear it rattling around, is what I consider to be more my high altitude setup. So when I went out to Utah, Colorado, those kinds of places where we're not talking about East Coast type elevations, 4,000 or 5,000 feet. We're talking more pushing 9,000, 10,000 feet. I find that my alcohol stove doesn't work as well at those elevations. So it takes a long time to boil. So this is my high altitude setup, and I'll show you what my regular setup is. My regular eating utensil is still one of my favorites. It's a Human Gear Duo, and I like it because it is overall longer than a lot of usual sporks that you see on the market, and it's detachable, so it has a smaller footprint, and it is ridiculously cheap. You guys know from the time I started using this that this has pretty much been the only thing I've been using. The only other change or modification to the Snow Peak Trek 700, which is the main pot right here, is this little guy right here. The typical lid on the Snow Peak 700 is a little denser, a little heavier, and that's not the reason why I bought this. It shaves a little bit of weight off, but I actually thought I had lost the lid. And one thing that's annoying about the Snow Peak 700 lid is that it kind of has this hook. I think it's meant so you can kind of hook it with a spork or something and pull it up. But most times I try to grab it with my finger and it annoys me. So this is a 4-dog stoves cover made for the Snow Peak that's titanium, and it has this little wooden knob and a screw right there, and that works well for me. And then the MSR Pocket Rocket 2, which has been fantastic for me. And then a little mini Bic lighter, and I usually will have another Bic lighter. Usually I carry about 3 Bic lighters because I'm a little paranoid in case anything ever happens. I want to be able to start a fire. So there's that. Some of you didn't know about me. And then of course the 110 gram canister. I just usually use MSR or whatever is available. If I'm on a backpacking trip, I usually use MSR. I think the mix is a little better for the stove or just in general, rather than the cheap Walmart stuff I'll use for camping, but not on a backpacking trip. And then of course the Trek 700 is the main body of it. You realize right away in terms of cook kit, what I tend to do is I tend to rehydrate things. And be it granola, be it making hot chocolate or oatmeal, be it Mountain House, anything like that. I usually am not super fancy when it comes to any sort of backpacking food or taking a lot of stuff out there. It's usually prepackaged, ready to go, add water, and you're done. So my kit kind of reflects that. So the kit that you just saw, the high altitude kit, if you will, is 8 ounces total. So how do I lighten this up even more so it's sub 6 ounces? The way I do that is I use a simple alcohol stove. All you need is a hole punch, and this is a potted meat can, and 5 minutes later you have a simple alcohol stove. One thing I make sure to do is I leave enough room here for enough alcohol to get one boil of about 2.5 cups of water, which is my fairly common or my higher end of what I'm going to end up doing. So that's worked really well for me. And of course I just bring like a mini bottle of water. I usually will mark it up with markers, do not drink, X's all over it, so I know and anyone else knows that it's not for consumption. And typically I'd say when we were in the Smokies, I usually will take, I just know this by now, about this much is a boil. And as you figure that out yourself, you'll get more comfortable with just eyeballing and be like, okay, that's 3 days worth of cooking. And so this is actually more than I'll ever use. I usually come home with extra, and I make sure I bring some extra fuel for at least 1 or 2 more boils, just in case. Same thing with the Bic lighter. I just one of those paranoia things. They say you pack your fears, so I pack extra fuel and I pack fire starting stuff. So what do you guys use? Most times I use this very simple stove, and it has worked fantastically for me. Do you end up using a backpacking stove like the BRS stoves, which is really cheap but works really well? Do you use the Pocket Rocket 2, or do you use a version of an alcohol stove? I know there are lots of different versions of these stoves out there, and you can really go down the YouTube rabbit hole if you're talking about alcohol stoves. If you don't believe me, just give it a try. But let me know what you guys use down in the comments. Thanks for watching, guys.